This year's results from Consumer Reports' annual survey about car reliability. Next on Talking Cars. Hi everybody, welcome to Talking Cars with Consumer Reports. I'm Tom Mutchler.
I'm John Lincove.
I'm Anita Lam.
And I'm Jake Fisher.
It's fall again. The leaves are changing. Little kids will be showing up on your front door for candy. There's some annoying things about fall though too. You have to rake up leaves, everything's pumpkin spiced. But you know, what's really annoying is having a car that's unreliable. So it just so happens that fall is the time when we announce our annual reliability survey. And I'm so happy to have Anita Lam here. She is in charge of that survey. So thank you for joining us for this episode of Talking Cars.
Oh, you're welcome, and thanks for having me again.
Oh, no problem. You were great a while ago. We're happy to have you back. How do we get all this information?
So each year in spring, we send out a questionnaire to all our subscribers, asking them about problems they had with their vehicles in the past 12 months.
Mm-hmm. And we're gonna focus a lot in this episode on new cars. You know, if you go to buy a new car, what is your most reliable choices? What are your least reliable choices? What problems do people typically have with new cars?
So with new cars, the problems have really changed. It used to be you have engines and transmissions and mechanical problems, but now it's more like infotainment system, the things you play with in your car, and also the new technology such as with the higher speed transmissions, the 9-speed, the 8-speed, dual clutch.
As manufacturers try to eke out more fuel economy out of cars.
Yes, that's right, exactly. Yeah.
And we often see new infotainment systems and new transmissions in redesigns. So that's sort of this very vulnerable point in a car's life cycle. And these trends are going to come up again and again as we go through this episode of, you know, where you start seeing cars fall down in reliability. So Jake, you want to buy a reliable car. What are the most reliable car brands?
So again at the top, we see Toyota and Lexus. These just every year we're seeing they continue to be reliable. They're a very conservative company really as they roll out new technologies, and it works well. But what's really interesting is number 3. Mm-hmm. Number 3 is Buick. Mm. And this is really the first time in the top 3, and Anita, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, I don't recall ever seeing a domestic as number 3 automaker. I mean, going back to as long as we've been comparing automakers. Mm. So it's really a big shift.
Right. John, how does Buick make it into the top 3?
A lot of their products have been maybe a little long in the tooth, or they've already been in other countries. So they have a very Europe-dominated lineup mm-hmm. with a couple of their models. They also don't have the big pickup trucks and the big SUVs that are populated throughout the other Chevrolet brand, General Motors brands, excuse me. So they have vehicles that have had the kinks worked out of them. Mm-hmm. From the other parts of the country or whatever. And again, big thing that hurts Chevy, GMC and such, and even Cadillac, some of these big trucks, Buick's just void of that. They have a small lineup, and when everything's really good, it boosts them up. I mean, they've been in the top 10 and bouncing around there for the last couple of years, so it's not a shock that they're doing well. To move up to number 3 is huge.
The Encore's been around a while. We are seeing some new products out of Buick, as we talked about on a podcast a couple weeks ago. Envision, Cascada. So we'll see how they affect the lineup.
Right. We don't really have sufficient data on those new models yet. So this year, maybe next year, we'll be able to tell how they do.
Right. A brand that is continuing to do well in reliability is Audi. Why is Audi doing well?
Audi they are actually kind of like Toyota and Lexus. They're rather cautious. They don't do big dramatic changes in technology. Their infotainment system, the MMI, has always been reliable. They do tweaks to it and they're fine. The engines and transmissions, they are well-proven platforms. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the new Q7 actually came out and it was reliable in its first year. And MMI, they make changes to it, but the Germans are they aren't the most intuitive systems, but they tend to be pretty reliable systems.
Well, they're getting better. I mean, and what's interesting about the German system, I mean, really, what was it? It was really iDrive that kind of started this whole thing into infotainment systems. I mean, going back about 15 years.
Yeah, 2002, I believe.
And at the time, it was buggy and there was problems with it and was really, really complex. But since they were kind of the innovators there, they have the most history with those systems. And it seems like BMW and of course Audi was there pretty soon after.
Yeah, they followed, I believe, 2 years later.
So they have worked out the bugs, and not just bugs. I mean, they've made it more intuitive, but I mean, we don't see a lot of problems from those systems from the German auto manufacturers.
Mm-hmm. Rounding out the top 5, we see Kia. Kia's not far off from sister company Hyundai either, are they?
You know, they share the same lineup, you know, similar. As much as they say that they're two different companies, you know, a lot of Kias are basically rebadged Hyundais with some different trim and such. Maybe a couple different engines here or there. Again, much like Buick, you know, a little slightly older lineup, devoid of big trucks and some big problematic vehicles, and you know, not hurt by models that are a little longer in the tooth. They have had success with the redesigned Sonata for Hyundai, and Kia, it's the same thing with the new Optima's launched well. A solid brand that is, you know, keeping on, not being huge, you know, blowing up their lineup and changing things, innovating, you know, a little evolution of their product line, and not all wholesale giant changes.
Right, and what's interesting is that Kia and Hyundai are beating a lot of Asian brands that people typically expect to be reliable. I mean, for years and years, people think that Nissans have been reliable or Acuras have been reliable, and for years and years, they've been mid-pack in our ratings. But this year, we did see 2 Japanese companies that typically have been very high in our ratings fall. One of those was Honda. What happened to Honda?
Right. So Honda had redesigned the Civic completely from ground up. So they have the new powertrains. They also have a new infotainment system.
Right, and Honda very seldom redesigns a Civic from ground up, right?
Well, sure. I mean, the Honda Civic. I mean, they've had. I mean, like clockwork. What, every 5 years, Honda redesigns an all-new Civic, but it really hasn't been an all-new Civic, right? I mean, they've carried so many of the components out for generation to generation. This is the first time we've seen, like Nita says, I mean, completely different. I mean, it drives different. The interior is different. The screens are different. The everything.
So the Civic's suffering from infotainment system problems?
Yes, so the infotainment is the major problem, but that's not the only one. And there were other minor things like the gauges were going out.
Well, that's not good.
Yeah.
They also had some issues with the Pilot.
The Pilot shares the same infotainment system, so it also have more or less the same issue.
Okay, that makes sense. A brand that has dropped, that has typically been doing very, very well in our ratings, is Subaru. What happened to Subaru?
Well, Subaru is small lineup, you know, so when everything's great, they move up really high. When a couple core products hurt them, they drop quickly, and that's what happened here. Legacy Outback, they dropped to average. Right. Average is fine, but for a vehicle, you know, for a manufacturer like that, where they've had above average for years, that's a big drop for them. And then also you have the WRX, smaller model line overall, not as high in sales, but it went to below average, so that hurt them. And then compound that with the fact that the Impreza is being redesigned, so there's not, we took that out of our brand rankings, and that really hurt them as well, because the Impreza was a solid, reliable vehicle that boosted the brand up. Right. So you have a kind of a confluence of factors that hurt Subaru.
Okay, so that pretty much summarizes the Asian brands. Now, Buick, let's talk about the domestics. Buick was up at number 3. A lot of the other domestics, other than Fiat Chrysler, which we'll get to later, have been falling mid-pack. Chevy and Ford, they're almost equal. How's Chevy looking, Anita?
Well, Chevy, this year, to talk about the good news, the Corvette improved to average. Having a couple of years after the redesign, they were below, so that helped them out. But one of the disappointments was the new Volt that was redesigned for 2016. Actually, strangely enough, have problems with the gas engine.
Oh, that's no good.
So that brought the reliability to, well, below average.
They also impressively launched the Cruise pretty well, didn't they?
Yes, yeah, okay. That was the other good news I forgot, was the Cruise had well above average reliability. In fact, it's the most reliable among compact cars. Well, after the Prius.
And that makes the Cruise quite a nice, an interesting car to buy, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the Cruise did well in our tests too. So to see it's reliable, that's pretty impressive. I mean, just to hold on the Volt for a second. I mean, it is pretty amazing. You have this, you know, electric hybrid, all this vehicle, and what goes wrong is the gasoline engine. But you know, if you look at hybrids in general, you know, they tend to do pretty well. Electric cars in general tend to do pretty well. But it's kind of that added complexity that the car has that could be bringing it down.
Chevy, however, has a problem, which you alluded to earlier with trucks.
Yeah, so kind of gave it away, but they're
Thanks, John.
you know, wah, wah. Silverado, Sierra, Tahoe, Suburban, and then
Right, these
even
problems affect the GMC equivalent.
affects the GMC equivalent as well. It even reaches into Cadillac, which we'll probably
we'll
get
get to that.
We'll get to Caddy too.
Yeah.
But they're big, they're complex vehicles in many ways. Even though they're trucks, they still have a lot of different aspects to them. In the sense you're building full-size SUVs on them as well as you're building pickup trucks. They're having a lot of issues. Across the line, and the way GM populates those vehicles throughout their product line. It was one thing if it was only pickup trucks,
Right.
but because they're building so many SUVs and they have such a huge volume of them that it's rippling through, and they're dropping, and they're hurting. In fact, hurting the domestic pickup market of availability of a good, reliable pickup truck for people to go out and buy, or
Right.
or a big full-size SUV.
Because for the most part, GM sedans are typically pretty reliable, but their full-size trucks and full-size SUVs aren't. It's a bit of the same case with Ford, isn't it, Jake?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, there were some very serious issues with Ford as they really launched all their new products. But now we're seeing they're getting a bit out of the woods. I mean, the Ford Fusion has improved. That's a really nice entry. But while the pickup trucks they're struggling with, they're not completely out of the woods with their car products too. And really, it's not so much the infotainment systems. I think they're getting a handle off Mind 4 Touch and moving on to Sync. There's some indications that Sync 3 is quite a bit better. But the transmissions that they have put in some of their products, like the Ford Fiesta and the Ford Focus, they're still troublesome. They really hit the ground with a lot of problems. Again, as Anita was saying, with these multi-speed transmissions, dual clutch transmissions, dual clutch has really been kind of a sore point for Ford cars.
Which is a shame because, like you talked about, Sync 3 is appearing to be quite a bit of a better launch than my Ford Touch ever had when it comes to infotainment, right?
Yes, that's correct. We see relatively low problem rate, about 2 or 3% compared to several years ago when they first launched it in other Ford products. That was over 10%.
It's a big improvement. It's
Yeah.
also a big improvement in usability, so something we're happy to see. The Europeans, they're typically falling mid-pack too these days, aren't they? How's BMW doing, Anita?
BMW has made quite an improvement this year by having all its models being average or better.
That is a big
It's
improvement.
an improvement. Yeah.
Yeah, because there were some, like the X5, which we all really like, which hadn't been reliable for a while. Now it's reliable, and we can recommend that.
Right. Yeah.
Anita, how about Mercedes-Benz?
So Mercedes is it has slight improvement, but its products are divided into two groups. The ones that are really good, like the GLC, which is the replacement for the GLK small SUV. It came up with much above average reliability in its first year. And some of the other SUVs, just as GLA, also improved. But on the other hand, the C-Class, the S-Class sedan, they are still below average.
Okay.
And also the GLS, the bigger SUV.
The SUV. So it's a mixed
Yeah,
picture
so
for
it's
Mercedes-Benz.
mixed, yeah.
Volvo.
Yeah, Volvo. Volvo's really hurt with their big flagship product. So the XC90 was the first all-new Volvo under their ownership of Geely, Chinese ownership group. Sure. They put a lot of resources in this vehicle, but really suffers from a lot of problems with touchscreen.
Infotainment
The
systems,
infotainment
yeah.
system. So come back to that. And it's not I rebooted whatever. It just didn't. It was wholesale replacements of the units that people told us about. And it's a nice vehicle. We like the XC90. In our
We have
testing,
some
not the
complaints,
best
yeah.
vehicle, not the worst, but it wasn't something that we hated.
Right.
But the touchscreen that we found just annoying to use, which is separate from reliability, is a reliability issue as well.
And that wasn't the only issue with the XC90. So I mean, the XC90, as Tom says, this is like the first new vehicle from Volvo. So Volvo was kind of okay for a while because they had kind of long in the tooth vehicles with shared components with Ford. They were also long in the tooth.
Yep.
But wow, the XC90, I mean, they just changed everything, right? I mean, a turbocharged and supercharged 4-cylinder powering a 3-row SUV, completely new infotainment, everything.
What could go wrong?
Well, and not even a knock on Volvo, but I mean, if you took Lexus, and Lexus tried to do that, I'm not convinced they would be able to get a vehicle all new, clean sheet like that right out of the gate.
Well, you saw that with Tundra 10 years ago. Tundra was not reliable the first year out of the gate from Toyota, and that was completely clean sheet. I mean, it goes back to just general advice that we give to people that the first year of redesign is not, you're most at risk of having problems with it. And now we're at the bottom. Once again, another year has gone by, and Fiat Chrysler is bringing up the bottom of the regs. The 4 worst brands, Dodge, Chrysler, Fiat, Ram, all at the bottom. What's going on with this company?
Yeah, they did make some improvement, but it's not sufficient. They might have gone from worse to slightly
They're
better,
still
but they
pretty
still have
bad.
problem. And they do have some models that have gone to average or better. So in the past, it was really the transmission problem.
They launched a
9-speed.
9-speed. It was
9-speed,
kind of bad when they launched it. There's been improvements, but those older cars still have problems, right?
Right. They have improvement, but the improvement is not sufficiently to get them totally out of the water.
I mean, they also, like, near and dear to my heart, the Dodge Durango dropped below average. There's been troubles with Jeeps. The Grand Cherokee has long been unreliable, continues to be unreliable. The Ram 1500 is not reliable. Just
Right.
a lot of troublesome products.
Yes, even if they have a small lineup, but still they haven't been able to completely eliminate problems with them.
Turns out, though, that the least reliable car you can buy brand new is not a Chrysler. It's, what is it, John?
Cadillac Escalade. It's almost at the bottom. It's almost a 0, I guess, on our 0 to 100 point scale now. And again, suffers the same maladies as the Chevy pickup trucks and the big SUVs. It's that family lineup.
Right. They're having build quality issues. They're also having some problems with their 8-speed, their new
Right,
8-speed transmission.
Yeah, so the Escalade is the one with standard 8-speed automatic transmission, which are on some of the other GM products, but not to as a big extent. And that's what gave them problem. That has been owners who have to replace the transmission twice already
Wow.
in the short time that they own it.
That's horrible for what can easily be a $90,000 SUV.
Yeah.
Wow. Other cars that rank among the least reliable are the Ford Focus, which we talked about earlier with the problems with its dual clutch transmission. The Jeep Renegade, a new Chrysler product, came out with the 9-speed. They had some build quality issues. You talked about earlier that the Chevrolet Suburban and the GMC
The
Yukon
Yukons and the Yukon
XL
XL,
equivalent, there's build quality issues there too. And the Chrysler 200, another product that they had with the 9-speed. But all this talk about new cars kind of misses the fact that our survey is this treasure trove of information. It goes back, how many years are we giving information for now?
Well, we give information for about 10 model years, and since people are keeping their cars for longer, we started asking about even older model years, going back to 2000.
Wow. So you wind up being able to see trends, things like, when do problems typically show up? I buy a new car. When do problems start to show up?
And it's actually quite interesting that problems start to show up the second year. So you expect the first year is kind of the honeymoon period, everything's fine, but in the second year, that problem rate almost double.
Wow. So the honeymoon's over after
Yes.
after about 18 months. Well, that's depressing. Thanks, Anita. Thanks a lot. Also, okay, so there are also a lot of people out there who have 8-year-old, 10-year-old cars. Can they be reliable transportation, especially compared to new cars?
Yes, if they're well maintained, they could go, these days cars can easily go 200, even 300,000 miles. And some of the issues that we see in older cars, they are like suspension, which could be just having some of the parts
It's
being
just
worn
mileage,
out.
yeah.
Due to mileage and also the climate system.
So then it sounds like, though, if you buy a car from a reliable brand, you can have a very long lifespan with
Yeah,
it.
sure, yeah.
So that is going to wrap it up for this year's episode on reliability. As always, we thank you for listening. We'll see you again next time.